Excellent.
Welcome, everybody. Exciting stuff. Do you know what? The weather in Melbourne is awful. We've got like torrential rain. It's like Scotland. It doesn't come down straight. It comes down to the side. It blows into absolutely everything. And it's dark. It's dreary tonight. It's just the perfect night for an Isle of whiskey, I think. I'm pretty keen on this now because of what the weather's like here. It's not cold, mind you, but I don't think it needs to be cold for whiskey. It just needs to be wet and make you feel a little bit like you're in Scotland, where apparently it always rains. So if anybody doesn't know me, Craig Merson, I am the owner, director of the Whisky Company, and tonight we're going to bring to you five incredible, I would say, Isle of whiskies. Really excited about this one, where we can have a look at, I guess, whiskies that we wouldn't usually be able to look at. Maybe hard to find in a bar, hard to find in a shop for retail as well. So they are whiskies that ultimately we can talk about and sort of try to get to understand a little bit more where they came from, why they were created, where they were created from, and have a bit of fun with it. We've got a chat. If you can please use the chat as much as possible, write down questions. If you've got the answers for people, you can obviously write down the answers and just keep putting your tasting notes in there as well. Don't be scared to use it, and we'll try to call out as many questions and as many tasting notes as we can. There's not a wrong question. There's not a wrong tasting note. It's up to you. I'm going to pass you over to Simon, who is the importer of this whiskey, and certainly somebody we've had on here before in the past, full of knowledge, been in the industry for many years, and always good to have you on board, Simon. Welcome.
Thank you, Craig. And we've got a rather wet evening up here in Sydney as well, so I'm very much looking forward to tucking into some Islay drams. Craig has a very rare picture as his background there tonight, a sunny day on Islay.
A winter's day.
Look, so the whiskey range that we're trying tonight is the Character of Islay whiskey range. And now, has anyone here actually made a pilgrimage out to Islay? Any of you on the call tonight? It is one of those places that if you are a whiskey lover, will call to you at some point, and it's just really worth making a trip out there to the Hebrides and to the wonderful Isle of Islay. A really magical place that's full of stories. And those stories are something we wanted to capture when we created this Character of Islay range. All these whiskies come from a company called Atom Brands, and we're behind Darkness Whiskey and that boutique whiskey company as well, which some of you might be familiar with. We were already bottling Islay whiskies under those brands, but we wanted to create a real home for some of the wonderful parcels of Islay whiskey that we got. And we had an ambition to make these whiskies, or a lot of them, constantly or continuously available, which is quite hard to do when you're an independent bottler. So Character of Islay Whisky Company, we don't distill these whiskies. We source some amazing casks, and then we marry these particular releases together. And it is quite hard to find. We've got a couple of single casks going to be trying later on. It's particularly hard to find single casks of Islay whiskey that you can name these days. If you speak to people who are in the cask buying business, the cask industry is absolutely going nuts. I imagine you all being whiskey lovers here tonight, that on your Instagram feed, you've constantly got ads of people trying to sell you whiskey, or perhaps trying to sell you into cask investment opportunities. Unfortunately, with more and more people trying to go after casks, the price of casks is getting incredibly expensive. And Islay in particular is in huge demand. And a lot of the big companies like Diageo, for example, have really sort of turned off the tap in terms of supply. So a couple of the whiskies that we're trying tonight are going to be very, very hard to find again. There's a 25-year-old and a 33-year-old. Certainly trying to find Islay of that age at an accessible price point is becoming very, very hard. I think we should probably crack open our first whiskey without further ado. So we're going to start with the Aerolite Lyndsay. So it's a Islay 10-year-old. Actually, I've got the full-size bottle behind me here as well on my shelf. So it comes in this rather handsome-looking bottle here. Aerolite Lyndsay simply is an anagram for 10-year-old Islay. So we wanted to create a whiskey that was sort of took that place on the drinker's shelf when they want an everyday Islay. So this one is really designed as a sessionable Islay. Like all our whiskies, we never chill filter. We never add caramel coloring. And so we'll bottle this at a healthy 46% to avoid us having to use any chill filtration and stop that whiskey going cloudy. Well, let's give this first whiskey a little crack. So there's loads and loads, of course, peat smoke on the nose, and we should expect that. We wanted this to be obviously Islay. What we do get is some of those almost like smoked paprika, glazed hams, grilled pineapple sort of aromas coming through as well. We wanted this to be more of a sweet smoke as opposed to that sort of really oily creosote sort of character coming through. And on the palate, that carries through as well, I feel. What are our thoughts on this this first little dram? So it's from an undisclosed distillery. A few of the whiskies we're going to be trying tonight, we can't tell you exactly where they're from, but we should be able to deduce where these whiskies are from without too much thought. Do we know how many distilleries are currently operating in Islay? We can sort of narrow it down. So a 10-year-old Islay. This one we use 70% bourbon cask, ex-bourbon cask. 25% of this marriage we used ex-Oloroso sherry casks. So we use small little quarter casks and octave casks. So just 125 and 64 litre casks, a very small finishing casks that were made for us in Jerez in Spain. We also added what we like to call character casks as well. So about 5% of the whiskey that goes into each of these bottles is from a character cask or an older whiskey from this particular distillery. There we go. And of course, there's Ardnahoe now producing as well, and Port Ellen about to open. But of course, Ardnahoe wouldn't have any whiskey that would be old enough to be a 10-year-old age statement to go into this bottle. So what distilleries do we think we can cut out straight away? This is quite heavily peated, so we can probably cut out Bowmore. Bruichladdich can cut out. Okay, yep. It's definitely not Bruichladdich. Could it be a peated make from them? Say it's probably not. We do actually get some there's some heavily peated stocks from Bruichladdich. Of course, we're trying an Octomore later in this tasting. I'd say we can probably cut out Bunnahabhain as well. Yes, they do peated stocks. We do see some younger peated Bunnahabhain stocks come available on the market. Kilchoman is one that you don't see with independent bottlers. We can probably safely rule out Kilchoman. It's a safe, probably a safe bet that we're looking at, somewhere from the Kildalton coast, or at least from the east coast of Islay there. So there are four sort of major distilleries that we're talking about here: Lagavulin, Laphroaig, Ardbeg, and Carlila on that side of the island. Of course, Bunnahabhain's on that side of the island as well. I think we've already ruled that out. If anyone wants to tender a guess, I can neither confirm nor deny where it's from.
I'm going to tender a guess just for myself, and then I'll look at the chat, but I'm going to make sure that nobody else is. So some of these put in here already. It's a garlic cow. So I'm going to say Laphroaig. I was going to say, I'm never a lover of Laphroaig as Laphroaig from the distillery. Yeah. I'm always a lover of Laphroaig as a single cask or independent bottling. So it's quite interesting when I look at that and I go, well, so it's for me, it's beautiful in the nose. It's got a beautiful flavour on it. So I would say it's maybe a Laphroaig, but yeah.
We do get a lot of whiskey from Laphroaig. We usually cannot name it as Laphroaig. There is a trade name that you were allowed to use called Williamson. But again, we're not allowed to use that trade name. That's trading name. That's become less common. You're actually allowed to use that. We often get sold Laphroaig, and we have to call it a blended malt So even though we know it's all from one distillery, we are told that we're no longer allowed to call it a single malt a lot of the time with the casks that we buy. So obviously, Laphroaig is owned by Beam Suntory. They're trying to protect their IP. As Islay whiskey is becoming more and more popular, a lot of the distilleries will actually try and protect their IP by not allowing you to name the whiskey. It's becoming more and more common within the independent bottling game. So trying to make it hard for us. And this is why, as an independent bottler, we wanted to come up with our own brand or our own identity for each of these whiskies. Every one of these whiskies, the first three we're trying. So we're going to start with Aerolite, of course, then move on to the Grey Seal and the Fiona Macleod. Each of them are their own characters of Islay, if you will. The idea behind this is, that this island is a place that you go on a pilgrimage to. Often you'll go there with mates, visit these distilleries, have a few drams, and tell a few yarns. We think that the best stories actually happen when you pop the cork off a bottle and start drinking some whiskey. So that's why we've got these sort of mythical characters that we've made up. I can't tell you exactly where this is from, but I can confirm that this first one is not Laphroaig, Craig. But no, that's good. And then some people said, I don't think it's Caol Ila. I can neither confirm nor deny that. But the idea is that we wanted to put our own stamp on this whiskey. So by using those sherried quarter casks and octave casks, we're able to make a whiskey that doesn't taste like the official bottling from this particular distillery. Yep. When we first launched this back in 2019, we got some really rave reviews. We had quite an interesting way to launch it. We launched that at Fèis, which is the Islay festival that happens in summer on Islay every year. And one of our sales managers at the time actually owns a little cottage behind a distillery called Caol Ila, which is the largest distillery on Islay, and invited a whole lot of special guests along, including like Charles McLean and Dave Broom, all these special guests that were on Islay for Fèis. And they end up having an absolute ball in this old distillery cottage behind Caol Ila Distillery. They just had bottles of whiskey there, and we were just passing around glasses and a bottle. And it was so popular, this party, that the next day a couple of the members of our team were out and about and heard people talk about this party and say how amazing it was that they got to go to it, even though they were never there. So just a sort of another example of those tall tales that people tell when they've had had a few whiskies. And we had a great quote from Dave Broom about this whiskey, and he says, another great whiskey for a drinking session. He said, grab a bottle, glasses, and throw the cork away. So it's meant to be sessionable. It's a really accessible price point, and for me, this is my favorite whiskey to take camping or enjoy on the beach.
So see in relation to, you were talking about when you get to name what's where the distillery's from. Do you do that when ultimately do you purchase the cask sometimes 2 years ago and let it mature, or do you purchase the cask now and then release it? What's the sort of...
So we do a bit of both. So there are three sort of main ways we can get casks as an independent bottler. So we'll buy directly from distilleries. Unfortunately, most distilleries are owned by quite large concerns like Diageo, Pernod Ricard, Beam Suntory, and often they won't sort of deal with little guys that just want a handful of casks. We have been around at Adam Brands now since about 2008. So we've started to build up a reputation as a reputable bottler. And so we start to get some of those contracts from distilleries. So we did have a good contract with Diageo, for example, getting an Islay single malt from their largest distillery on the island, Caol Ila. We've also will buy whiskey from brokers. It's a main source where independent bottlers will get whiskey from. So there's a long history of whiskey brokers in Scotland, and those brokers will sell casks of whiskey to blenders. And they'll even sell them to larger concerns too. So if I'm making Johnny Walker, for instance, although I own 29 distilleries being from Diageo, occasionally I might be missing a certain type of whiskey. I might need some 18-year-old Speyside, sherried Speyside. And so I'll go to a broker and they'll be able to fill the 50 or so casks that I need to finish my big blended whiskey. So no, the brokers are a main source. And then finally, we do buy from private owners. we tend to buy casks that are ready for bottling, but for things like Islay, we do have a couple of lines, I guess, or a couple of whiskies where we get quite decent supply, where we either still have a contract or have had contracts in the past. And in that case, Craig, we will hold on to those casks for a couple of years. We might finish them in sherry, or finish them in a Moscatel cask, or re-rack them, or vat marry them. There's a number of things we can do as an independent bottler. So I guess try and make more out of that liquid that we've bought. And certainly for Aerolite Lyndsay, that was what we did by re-racking a good portion of this into sherry casks. We're able to put our own stamp on this particular distillery. And when we first launched this, we actually won World's Best Islay Single Malt 12 years and under at the World Whisky Awards as well. So managed to beat out Lafroig and all the big guys as well. So we've Ardbeg even and Carlila. So we're really happy with that.
It's the one thing, like I said, one thing I find you find a lot in whiskey is that an independent bottling of an Islay whiskey genuinely is, for me, is always better than what it would be from the distillery. It's just looked after more. The casks are always just a little bit better. So they're not trying to be something on a large batch scale. So they're not looking for lots and lots of casks to obviously that. So it just brings out more flavor for me, and it's a bit more unique, But based on in the cask, are you buying the name then when you buy the cask? So let's say you bought a cask back in 1990 to this year, and it was Lafroig. When you buy it back in 1990, does that give you the right to use Lafroig, or is it just them telling you that?
It's when we purchase the cask, we'll be told whether we're allowed to name it or not.
Right.
And the price will vary depending on whether we're able to name it or not. And so you can still buy Carlilas and Lafroigs, but they're getting rarer and rarer and rarer to be able to buy nameable Islay distilleries. Yeah. That's the issue. There's a big sort of at the moment, the real challenge is there's a big gap between what you can sell whiskey for in a bottle and what the cask is worth. So whiskey is actually worth more in a cask than it is in a bottle, which is insane, because really the only way that people buy and consume whiskey is in a bottle, not in a cask. So yes, Jason, it is a bit cheaper if it can't be named, but it's all it is all going up in price, unfortunately. Which is making it harder and harder for independent bottlers. There's more independent bottlers now than there ever were, and I think that's a great thing, because independent bottlers, as Craig has pointed out, will often be more adventurous. They're going to be making stuff in smaller batches, and you're just going to get to see a different side of a distillery than you usually would. A small batch for Diageo is 8,000 bottles. Small batch for us is 120 bottles, to put things in perspective. Some Aerolite Lyndsay, for example, will make in batches about 1,200 bottles each time we make a batch. So there's just that little bit more attention to detail and care we can take. So it's we'll put a handful of casks as opposed to dozens of casks.
Yeah. That's it. It's incredible. It's like it's I like the idea of not having a name sometimes. I like the idea of like trying to figure out where it's from, and it's a bit more challenging and adventurous. And like I've read as well that Aerolite is an acronym. So it's an acronym of 10-year-old. So it's like so it's just a creative sort of way to, well, what we're going to call it, how we're going to market it something good. And it's like it's quite a cool, fancy what was a marketing sort of way to.
We wanted to go for a bottle that had quite a vintage look to it as well. So we wanted to kind of hark back to the time when whiskey was a bit simpler, when you didn't need to use pirates or peat-breathing dragons or whirlpools or send whiskey into space. Those are all digs at Ardbeg, by the way, which their marketing's great. Don't get me wrong. I love Ardbeg whiskey, but it gets a bit ridiculous whiskey marketing times. So we wanted something that was simple and that, kind of did what it says on the bottle. So Islay 10-year-old, 46%, sessionable, absolutely tastes like Islay. A few questions here in the chat I'll answer. So we buy these casks from Islay. Look, a lot of these casks might be stored on the mainland. It's no secret that a lot of the whiskey produced on Islay is matured on the mainland. We bottle all our Scotch whiskey in Scotland, especially with single malt. You cannot call it Scotch. It's being bottled outside of Scotland. So even these little minis that you're trying today, they were bottled in Scotland and hand waxed in Scotland. So technically, if you're buying a pack of minis, tasting packs of minis, the SWA can frown upon those and start writing cease and desist letters to people. They're a bit antsy like that, even though I think it's great being able to share drams like this in little mini format. Aerolite is from the same distillery every time as well, just to answer your question, Jason.
The interesting thing about rebottling as well in Australia was I find that there's been a bit of this going around at the moment with importers, and a lot of importers are being told don't sell it to people that are rebottling it overseas. But you're in a position where you say, well, I don't understand what's the point in that? Why are you frowning upon that? And like, oh, because they could change it. They could change in the bottle. They could change the label. They could change the characteristic to that whiskey and take away the characteristic what we're looking for. And then we're sort of like, well, you could do that in a glass.
Yeah.
And only could you do it in a glass. We do it in a cocktail. So what's the difference? You know, so
exactly. And no, the SWA do get all a bit uptight about it. The CRT, which from Mexico, which overlooks tequila, that are similarly as touchy about it as well. So no, tequila has to be bottled in Mexico to call it tequila. There are some things which I totally understand, but when you pouring something to a little sample, you're creating, getting more people to try that product. And surely that is a good thing for Scotch whiskey, in my opinion. But hey, we're getting political here. I think we should move on to the next dram.
Well, there's a question here. Will you plan on, say, a 15 or 18-year-old version in the future releases?
Look, it's a really hard one at the moment. We have quite a lot of liquid to keep producing Aerolite. Trying to produce 15 and 18-year-olds is harder. We could probably do a 12-year-old. But there are at the moment there's not huge amounts of aged Islay stock that we can sell at an approachable price. So what we're hoping will happen, for better or for worse, is that this whole cask investment idea to a certain degree will crash. I'm sorry if you have a cask, but if you do have a cask and you haven't made money on the cask investment scheme, we'll come and save you and buy it off you potentially. So it's something that we hope will change in the industry, because at the moment it's really driving up the price of Islay. And as I said, there's a big disconnect between what we can sell whiskey for in the cask and what we can sell it for in the bottle. So at the moment, because we've got plenty of younger Islay, so between 8 and 12 years old, we've got quite a lot of Islay. We can keep producing bottles, and people that were smart sort of stockpiled that when they saw the writing on the wall. That the tap was going to be turned off, but with older stocks, much harder. So let's get into something a bit older then. So Grey Seal. So this is the 25-year-old Islay. And yeah, this is all from the early 90s. This is from a different distillery than Aerolite Lyndsay. It's still a whiskey that's still an Islay whiskey that's heavily peated. But at 25 years of age, that peat is going to be somewhat subdued. Let's give it a crack. Again, we'll bottle this at 48%. So this was a vatting of several casks. These are all ex-bourbon hoggies we got from this. There wasn't huge amounts of stock being produced in the 90s as well. So that's another challenge with Islay. A lot of Islay distilleries, especially in the 80s, were only producing a couple of days a week, if they were producing at all. Big downturn in the popularity of blended Scotch whiskey, and you only need a small portion of peated whiskey in your blended Scotch. So peated whiskey is used as the base note in a blend. So Kalila, for example, is the base note in all the Johnny Walker releases. So although single malts are incredibly popular now, they were not near as popular in the 80s and 90s. So there was not a huge amount of whiskey being produced. So 25-year-old Islay single malt is becoming something of a rarity. So Grey Seal, our name for this bottle. God, I've got a bottle downstairs. I should have brought it up. Grey Seal has got a beautiful green label with gold foiling. Grey Seal is simply a pun this time. So it's not an acronym. It's a pun for the hooked-nosed sea pigs that surround the island, or grey seals. So that's where we came up. We're inspired with this name, but a different distillery. I will let you know this is from the Kildalton coast. There you go. There's the bottle there. George has got a bottle. Where did you get that bottle from, George? It is a absolutely smashing dram. I'm gonna take a bit of time, nosiness. Do take your time with this. But just incredible how an Islay whiskey gets to this age. Something magical quite happens. You get to see that underlying spirit rather than just that peat. Now you're starting to get all that fruit, all those esters actually come back after being previously hidden by the smoke in younger Islays. Peaches, apples, smoke kippers, and salty notes. Absolutely. Butterscotch. Some great tasty notes there.
Wow.
Oh. You do get this wonderful like grilled fruit note, which I really like. Peaches, absolutely. Apples, but it's more like cooked apples. You know, if you've ever baked apples like in a fire as well, like you've been camping, wrap them up in tin foil and bake them. It's that sort of note, bit of brown sugar.
Brown sugar. Wow.
Beautiful texture to this as well, and the finish is much longer than the Aerolite Lyndsay. Aerolite Lyndsay we actually kind of designed to be quite quaffable rather, and moreish. Like you keep on going back for more because it's just a smashable dram. But this is one you want to take some time with, just because that finish is so long, it lingers. You start to get all that peat, that earthy peat, and gentle smoke right at the end. But otherwise, just so much fruit.
Do you know what? When I started my sort of started whiskey journey, well, when I was in my teens, obviously, and then I drank whiskey for a while, and then didn't really get into independent bottling until I had this Ardbeg whiskey independently bottled from Chieftains, and it was the whiskey that got me into whiskey, that wanted me to learn a little bit more about it, all that sort of thing. And it was very hard to find something very similar to that after I'd had that. But this is it. The finish on it is just so like it. Was this, like you said, long, salty, so much kind of going on in your palate, and you want to go back, but you don't want to go back. You want to just enjoy it and let it go. And
it's
nice.
Everyone got like 30 mils, so this is one like come back to this later as well. Like keep half the dram and come back to it, because it's one you just want to really take some time with, I feel.
Yeah.
Oh. You're probably going to want some clues as to where this is from. As I said, it's from the Kildalton coast. If we're looking at a whiskey of this age, and it's from the 90s, Bruichladdich weren't producing, and Bruichladdich didn't make any peated whiskey till they reopened in the 2000s. So they weren't actually making peated whiskey. So definitely not Bruichladdich. Too peated to be Bowmore. For me, it's not. I find I used to work for the Diageo, so worked quite a bit with Lagavulin and Kalila. Lagavulin has this sort of dark chili chocolate note. They take quite a wide cut, so it's faintier. So it's not kind of heavy enough to be Lagavulin. Who else? It's definitely obviously too old to be Kilchoman. They weren't making peated stock at Bunnahabhain, so we're really narrowing this down to probably one of two distilleries in my mind that it could be. We don't actually, we can't 100% say where this is from. We have our thoughts of where it's from, given that the character, the character of it, but we just simply sold this as a parcel of 1990s Islay. So they just often we're just not told. So this is the spec. You have to we'll know the shape of the barrels. We'll know that it's Islay. We'll see the year it's distilled. But this is the game that we play as independent bottlers, is we've got to find those great casks, which can be a bit of a needle in a haystack. And then we've got to vat them together to make something that's a cohesive product. And this is just, absolutely cracking dram. We know it's all from one distillery. We cannot categorically say 100% where it's from. And the jury, for me, with a few people's out, other people going, this is so tropical, it's got to be Ardbeg. Other people saying it's got to be Lefroy. But I think that's the beauty of it, is to make your own educated guesses on where you think it might be from.
Very good. I'm not a drinker of Islay whiskey usually. I usually don't buy a bottle, and I am looking at this. You've not got many left, have you? There's
I've got a bottle. I've got a bottle downstairs. I bought a bottle of this. Just because I thought, no, the value for what this really is fantastic, because we can't name it, right?
Yeah.
If it did have a name on it, then that's these days it adds quite a bit to the price tag as well.
Yeah.
And like we don't, our packaging is fairly simple. It's not going to come in a hand blown glass decanter in a huge presentation box. As independent bottlers. I mean, some people do some pretty fancy bottling. Signatory does some great bottles. They're big, heavy bottle. Our packaging for this is a little bit more simple.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, again, interesting when you're tasting a whiskey and you've got all these notes in your mind, and then somebody writes maritime, but a little grassy as well. And it wasn't until like Linda said that, and I was like, oh, so it is. You know, like it's this. On the finish, there's this nice grassy note to it, and it's so good. You know, it brings this freshness back into that. Oh, no, it's after 25 years. A cask, extremely lengthy, great salinity. I love the salinity on it. It's brilliant. It's yeah, really keen on it. It's fantastic, great.
Yeah, it's something you're not expecting, right, from a whiskey of this age, especially a heavily peated whiskey, to have a freshness to it and to have so much fruitiness. And that for me is like the just the beauty of these old Islers when you can find them.
I said to my partner in crime, Anton, who usually does some of these as well, I said, I'll leave you some.
Good luck. Good luck.
Oh no. Oh dear, it's going to be hard. It'll be hard to not finish that. We'll see. I dropped it.
All right, let's move on to Fiona Macleod. So look, I'm sorry that Sam Simmons, is a head of whiskey, can't join us here this evening. So Dr. Sam Simmons is the man behind all these bottlings. He's our head of whiskey at Atom Brands. So he looks after Boutique, he looks after Character Islay and Darkness Whiskies. And he is actually a real doctor. So he used to have a blog site called Dr. Whiskey. His nickname is Dr. Whiskey. But he actually has a doctorate in literature from Edinburgh University. He's a Canadian chap. He ended up moving to Edinburgh, studying in Edinburgh, and whilst he was at universities where he sort of found his love for whiskey. He worked for many years as the global brand ambassador for Balvenie for almost 10 years. But he sort of never lost his affinity for literature. So Fiona Macleod is actually a literary reference. It's the pen name of an ELAC author, an author from Islay, called William Sharp. He actually wrote under a pen name Fiona Macleod. He used a female pen name. He wrote a series of short stories about the Isle of Islay. So this might make our two single casks we're going to try later, which are called The Stories of Wind and Wave, which was his series of short stories, make more sense. So the Macleods are also the lairds of the Isle of Islay as well. So they're the clan that rules the Isle of Islay, if you will. So that was also apt for this particular bottling. Now, all of the whiskey in this particular marriage comes from 1985. So it's all from 1 year. We bought quite a large series of hogsheads at the time. We thought it was going to last us a while, but I actually just sold the last bottles to my customer in Japan. I think Craig might have a couple, and then it's all done. But this is 80s, 1985 Islay whiskey, and that's right in the middle of the downturn. Most distilleries are only operating for a couple of days a week, if at all. Pretty much all the malted barley, so peated and malted barley at the time was coming from Port Ellen Maltings as well, which is the big Diageo Maltings. So Diageo was forced to actually shut down Port Ellen Distillery, which was obviously employing a lot of workers on the island, but they kept the maltings going at Port Ellen to maintain some employment. And at the time, there was a bit of a handshake agreement between all the distilleries on Islay that would take at least a portion of their malt from Port Ellen Maltings. So it was just a way to sort of keep malting happening on the island. This particular distillery, I think you can be able to guess, but I will give you a little hint. They do have their own maltings, and they have their own floor maltings at this particular distillery, which is going to narrow it down even further. We know when we try it that it's probably not heavily peated, and that it's of this age. It's definitely not Kilchoman. It's definitely not Bunnahabhain. It's not peaty enough to be Lafroig or Ardbeg. Too peaty to be Bruichladdich. That's not peaty enough to be like a Vullen or Carlila as well. So you can probably narrow it down. I think I've only not mentioned one operating distillery at the time. But let's pour a little bit in the glass. Quite a different character we're moving into here. I was debating whether to do this before or after the Grey Seal, but I just thought we should have this nice age progression and tell this story about these character Islay whiskies. But completely different on the nose here. Not at all what we might be expecting from an Islay whiskey, but at this age, most of that peat has dropped out. We're starting to get more fruit and malt loaf sort of notes as well. There's almost a slight floral note coming through too. I think like violet pastille. Yes, absolutely. Floral like violet flower. Absolutely. This is actually a common character from this distillery in the 80s. And we deliberately, when we got all these casks in, when we married them, we actually vatted them and actually stirred a lot, agitated that whiskey to blow off some more of those volatile notes. We wanted this violet character because it's quite unique to this particular distillery, but we didn't want it to be too overblown. So it's one of the techniques we use is actually, when we vatted the casks together, we stirred and let them sit in the stainless steel tank for quite a while to blow off some more of those volatile notes. Bottled at 46.3%. So again, we didn't need any caramel coloring or chill filtration. We did drop the ABV just ever so slightly on this as well. But those casks at this age, ABV was already way on its way right down. David, I can neither confirm nor deny. The peat sort of comes in very, very gently at the end there as it just gradually builds. Again, quite lengthy finish. Oh. Again, quite a tropical note coming through too.
I mean, ultimately, if it is Bowmore,
yeah,
it's the Bowmore that people talk about. It's the Bowmore that's the smoky, fruity character to it. Like it's not overpowering, but all about fruit and really good fermentation, and it's it's tremendous. It's not often you find a Bowmore like this. They're no longer out there, and a lot of people hunt for them.
Yeah.
So they become like really big collector's items because people can't find them anymore.
Yeah.
So it's or maybe not so much collector's items, but just they're still available to drink because they won't come back again.
So again, this is we bought this parcel unnamed.
Yeah.
But we know from the character, we can deduct where it's from. We know where it's from. That's the great thing is that even after 33 years in a cask, that this still maintains the signature of the distillery where it's made. And I think that's an awesome thing about whiskey. 33 years. This is a marriage of casks. We made about 2,500 bottles globally for this. So it wasn't a huge release. And as I said, we just sold our last 100 or so bottles to a customer in Japan. But it's incredible to me that after 33 years that it's still just undeniable where it's from.
Definitely. Yeah, Angel Share, 33 years. Wow. Quite a bit. So
of course. Yeah, would have been huge. Look, we have the advantage, I guess, and this is a great thing about these old Islas, and you see it with those really old Port Ellens and things too, is that the casks they were using were all refill hoggies. They're all refill cask. What they were trying to do at the time, so when they were making bucket loads of whiskey in Ireland in the 60s and 70s, and into the start of the 80s before they actually sort of pulled a pin on it. It's about 1982. they started shutting everything down as it was apparent that they had a massive oversupply, or a whiskey lock, massive oversupply of whiskey. So yeah, they were really producing a lot of whiskey, but it was mostly going into refill, and a lot of the time quite knackered casks. Now, no, these days when we're trying to get whiskey, or no, especially we look at Australian distilleries, they're trying to get whiskey out to market very quickly. So they're using very active casks. No, because all the Islay whiskies have mostly been used in blends. They weren't drinking them as single malts at the time. So they wanted to maintain as much distillery character as possible. They didn't want to create cask-driven whiskies. They created a cask-driven whiskey. It wouldn't necessarily be useful in a blend. So they needed to maintain distillery character. So refill casks were actually a blessing in disguise, because now we can drink these incredibly old whiskies that still maintain that distillery character, because they're not cask-driven. They're spirit-driven whiskies. And that's where it's, in my mind, it's a bit of an unsung hero of Scotch whiskey, is the refill cask. I guess the Scots being, have this this terrible perception that the Tinian don't want to spend any money. Well, it was a brilliant idea. That's why these whiskies are standing up to this day.
Definitely. We were just talking about that with Lagavulin 16. A lot of people saying that Lagavulin is the sort of like some of the people's first whiskey, and it's the whiskey that they go back to all the time and talk about all the time, and it's the one that they think that is all about like that's the whiskey that I rate all the whiskies to.
Yeah.
Then you go, some of those casks are like 3 times filled casks. So you don't worry about the cask sometimes, because if you're drinking Lagavulin 16, they're casks that have been used and used and used and used and used by the distillery, and they're still imparting some great flavour to it.
I mean, there's some great old sherried Islay, but I think for the most part, we see a lot of, especially when you look at the special facial releases of Islay whiskey, using all these fancy sherry cask finishes. And that's actually a relatively new thing with Islay. The majority of Islay is ex-bourbon and refill cask to maintain that distillery character. It's also the reason why you might notice a lot of the official bottlings, Lagavulin is an exception, but they have an 8-year-old now. A lot of the official bottlings of Islay whiskey are at that 10-year-old age statement. If you go across the Speyside or the Highlands, often the entry's 12. But it's just that, the younger Islay whiskey has more of that distillery character. It maintains more peat. So it was, kind of quite a deliberate move, I guess, by the distilleries to do that. What are our thoughts on this dram? Pretty special, pretty different. Has anyone had a Bowmore of this age before?
It is incredible. Yeah. And ultimately, I think from the word incredible, it's incredible the fact that we're able to drink something like this, and ultimately thinking about this is the last of it. I mean, this is the last of whiskey like this. Yeah. Ultimately from this distillery. Yeah,
I mean that's the thing, and unless you unless one of you is a billionaire trader or something I don't know about and can afford to buy some old Port Allens, you're not going to find. It's going to be incredibly hard to find Islay whiskey that's of this age or older. Because in the 80s, as I said, such little production. So in the 80s in particular, it's hard to find. There are some older bottlings around, but they are going for silly prices.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. So John said so sweet. There's definitely like some really beautiful sweet notes on there. For me, it's an education. Never had an Islay this old. It's great. We can join in and taste all that together. Lovely, the first time of this style. One of the most dessert-like Islays I've ever had. Mike, I'm back at school. There you go. Drinking this at school, Mike.
There you go. So that's the Fiona Macleod bottle there. There you go. That one's been popular, George. Who have you been sampling that with?
He's nearly finished it. He only opened it 2 hours ago.
So we've got the rare opportunity here where we get to try a 33-year-old Islay next to us, a 16-year-old single cask. which may or may not be from the same distillery. I can neither confirm or deny that. But we're going to move on to the Bowmore 16-year-old. So this is a single cask Bowmore, all distilled in 2003, 55.2%. This was natural cask strength for this cask. I'm going to pour some out, get it in the glass.
Can I just say whilst you're doing that,
Yep.
love these packs. They're so well put together. You know, every little bit of detail has been put into these. The bottles are great. It's so easy to open. Got nice little wax seals on top. The labels look great. And not only that, you know, all the stuff you get with it, just these. But we're obviously in a world where we're worried about how much we have impact on the environment and stuff, but there's not too much in these. They're quite light to post. And what was it? The cards are not too bad as well. Looks like they're all done in recycled paper as well, which is fantastic. You can put all your tasting notes in there. Also give you some tasting notes to start you out. I think it's a great little pack, you know, and even the little envelope that you put your tasting notes in that you can keep safe after you've done it. So they're fantastic. You have other packs like this as well, don't you? Like,
yeah, we do. It's something we started right back in 2009. We started. We have a website in the UK, which I won't mention because you should buy all your whiskey off Craig, of course. We have a website in the UK. It's called Master of Malt. Do buy locally. If you buy off Master of Malt, look, it's a great website, but you're going to get stung with excise and duty trying to ship it over. Apart from the shipping, you will get hit by customs. So just a word of warning. So we much prefer you to buy off local retailers for sure. But we started producing all these little waxed drams so that people could try a bottle before they tried. Try to sample the bottle before they actually committed to a full bottle purchase. And since 2009, we've bottled well in excess of 6,000 different spirits. We do advent calendars, tasting packs, all sorts of different packs of these drams, and it's been very, very popular. Especially advent calendars in the UK are huge. Whiskey Field advent calendars. It's something that hasn't quite caught on as much here because by the time they come out here, they're sort of well in excess of $300 for an advent calendar. So you're going to be quite committed whiskey drinker to get into one of those. Right. So yes, next up, Bowmore single cask. So this is from the Stories of Wind and Wave. So I mentioned earlier Fiona Macleod being the pen name of the Île author, William Sharp, wrote a series of short stories about Islay called The Stories of Wind and Wave. So the character of Islay, a whole thing about storytelling, is sort of coming full circle with our Wind and Wave series. So we've done a few outturns of Wind and Wave, and they're all being nameable single cask Islas. So when we do get nameable stocks, the idea was, because we don't get as many of them, that we would bottle those as a single cask. So I think quite a unique example here where we can try a 33-year-old next to a 16-year-old single cask, and we can might be able to see how it's progressed. But they were producing, when this was made in 2003, the spirit character had changed somewhat. So that spirit character from the 33-year-old you tried, they weren't making the same spirit in 2003. It simply wasn't quite the same character. So it was a character that was quite unique to that era in the early 80s, from the mid 80s through to the mid 90s with that distillery, which I can't tell you is called Bowmore. You are recording this, aren't you, Craig? I didn't say that. Didn't say where it's from.
Yeah, recording it.
This for me, and I checked out some of the notes on your little tasting cards as well, and I thought they're bang on, is that it's really sort of milky and a vanilla sponge cake coming through. It's a beautiful malt character, but then you still start to get some of that fruitiness that we saw in that older version, and then finishes with that soft smoke and salt. Just medium peated at Bowmore as well, so it doesn't go to quite the same level as what we've tried. Yes, less floral, absolutely, George. That floral note was something that only existed for a short window of time, and then they actually changed the distillation practice, and that floral note actually dropped out. So you don't see that. You only see that in really old Bowmores. You can still, for me, I can still kind of tell it's from the same distillery, and we know that this, because it says it's Sud State. We do say distillery on this. but no, if we were to narrow this down, it's quite easy to pick this as Bowmore in my opinion. Smelling the cake next to the ocean, salty and bready. Absolutely, Patrick. Does have a beautiful sweetness to it, Bowmore, and that's what I really like. Now, some of those Islay series get particularly dry. Now, some of those big Lafroigs are very, very drying. Where this just has that beautiful sweetness to it. The smoke is just enough here, in my opinion, especially after I had a few peated whiskies, just really add to the length as well. That's the beautiful thing about peat. It's why it's always been so prized by blenders, is that it adds length. If you're making a blend, you add a little bit of Islay in there, it goes a long way. It really helps add to the finish of your whiskey. What are your thoughts on this, Craig?
So this is probably more my side of not as much enjoyment of Islay whiskey. The smoke's a big driver in this for me this time.
Yeah.
It was I'm not sure if everybody feels that it's more smoky, but to me it's drier. It's that drier smoke. I like that milkiness on it though. I really like it on the palate. Yeah, just so that peat for me comes through a little bit more drier on this one. It's amazing though how different it is from the other one.
I know, right? Absolutely, and I think that's the point I was trying to make. It's just like how unique that previous one is, because that's just a real snapshot in time. But I mean, we've done quite a number of single cask Bowmores, and some of them start to go a little bit more tropical. Did a couple of 18-year-olds and they go a little bit more tropical than this. But this is more, in my mind, stone fruit, that vanilla sponge, and then you have quite a bit of that smoke coming through in the end.
David's actually maybe put a thing on it that I'm finding, I think, here, and that's a really good comment he's made, is that when you walk into a farmer's bar, I feel like the hay in the barn is freshly cut hay in a barn. And that's the thing that's really attracted me to this, is it's big, it's fresh on the nose, and so I've not had that big smoke yet, but that dried smoke yet, but I've hit this beautiful freshness on it, and that's the appealing thing to it. The milkiness, it's very appealing whiskey. For that, I actually think that it might go very well as a Boilermaker as well. So
I think so, really because of that breadiness, because of that maltiness that comes through. Absolutely. In my mind, now that we've had that farmer's barn without the aroma of dung, but maybe a saison, farmhouse saison with this would be absolutely perfect. Expensive Boilermaker.
That's how we like to roll, Patrick. No, it's not.
But yeah, it's going to be a Boilermaker. You can maybe call it, instead of a Boilermaker.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I absolutely love Islay whiskey and Boilermakers. I'm a big stout fan, big porter fan. So with something like Aerolite Lyndsay, like a big, a big stout's going to work really well.
There's parts of it as well that remind me when like a tomatin hits around 18 years, it has this like dark fruit note, this blueberry note to it.
Yeah.
And it's got that fruits of the forest note. It's got that fruits of the forest note to me on the finish, I think. It kind of reminds me of that a little bit, that tomatin fruitiness.
I sometimes get from a tomatin that's almost like fruit tingle sort of character. It gets so juicy. The other one of my favorite tasting notes of whiskey is Wrigley's juicy fruit.
Oh yeah, wow.
Yeah. Or PK chewing gum. Sometimes you get that really sort of like over the top fruity character. Love it.
It's good how it carries. We were just talking to somebody tonight about with Australian whiskey and with Scottish whiskey, and we're finding that Australian whiskey, perhaps there's spirit there, but it sometimes often gets lost in the barrel, and the barrel takes over, and you go, it's barrel driven, but then you go back to a lot of Scottish whiskey and you go, it's always this spirit driven, this fermented, beautifully fermented, distilled, and then just this cask that complements it through, you know. And it's just from that first get-go when they're making the wort and all that sort of thing, and they've just done such a good job, you know, and you can just see where that comes from. Nothing's taken it away from that, you know, through the process.
And Craig, that's a really good point, and it's one of the things I think that's crazy about Australian whiskey, because arguably, you know, the spirit that Australian distillers make is incredible. Now, often Australian distilleries look at quite long ferments, so 7-day ferments. So they're set up to make this incredibly delicious spirit that you can drink young, but often the cask is just completely smashes that beautiful spirit that they're making.
Right.
Yeah, which is a shame, because as you can see, you know, older whiskies that are in less active casks can work really well. I mean, very different climates we're talking about here. Absolutely, it's hard to compare. No, them exactly, but
we were talking to people in Cavalan. They were saying, like, when they try the barrels, in Scotland there can be 6 months between a whiskey where it's perfect and a whiskey where it's matured over, you know, or up to a year, etc. Where there's in Cavalan there can be a matter of days where that happens.
Wow.
And you're like, it's just the fluctuation in temperature during the summer or the warmer months. Yeah, just does it. Just takes away this perfect point of a whiskey.
With Scotland, you've only got to worry about 2 weeks of the year that are hot, right, Craig?
Well, I'm going back in June, so I'm hoping those are the 2 weeks.
So yeah, obviously, invariably in Scotland, it is, you know, it's going to be humid, it's going to be cool, and so those casks are just are a little bit more forgiving, especially when you know you can let something, you know, just sit there for a long time. They've got that Scotch whiskey has that benefit of being an industry that's been around for a couple hundred years, where in Australia we don't quite have that age yet, which will be great. It's very promising for the future, but it's still going to take some time. Definitely. Right, we've got one more whiskey to get into.
This is opening up really well as well. As
more.
Antoine's got no chance.
Right. Our last whiskey for the evening is an Octomore 9-year-old. So this is, again, a single cask Octomore. We actually had a 9-year-old Port Charlotte as well that released at the same time. So Octomore is obviously, or if you don't know, Octomore is the very heavily peated make that is made at Bruichladdich. Bruichladdich only started doing peated whiskey when they reopened in 2003, Craig, and I've got that right? Yep. May 2003, the very first spirit off the stills when they reopened in the 2000s. They were shut from the 80s. I think they produced it a little bit in the 90s, then reopened properly again in the 2003. The very first spirit that came off the still was a heavily peated make, and that was a make that later became known as Port Charlotte. They produce, obviously, Bruichladdich, Port Charlotte, Octomore. There's a couple of other makes they do. I can't remember them all, but there's another one called Lockendale as well, which you never see. But Octomore is a very, very heavily peated make, and they've really tried to push the boundaries, I guess, with how peated you can make a spirit. So to make this heavily peated, they will actually, peat the barley. The barley's is completely dried out through this peating process. So the peat smoke comes in touch with the grain, dries out the grain. The smoke actually attaches to the moist grain, and once that grain is dry, the smoke won't attach to it any longer. So to increase the level of peating, they actually moisten the grain again. So they actually spray it with water and then dry it out again. That's how they can actually increase the ppm, because the smoke won't actually stick to the grain once it's completely dry. Now, that might sound scary if you're not big into peat, but Octomore has this huge cult-like following. In fact, Bruichladdich Distillery in general does. And we've been very lucky to get quite a few casks of Bruichladdich, Port Charlotte, and Octomore in the past. And it's great when you find Octomore indie bottlings, because it gives you quite a different impression. This Octomore at 50%, we had a Port Charlotte and an Octomore at 50%. They were both low natural cask strength. They were oddities. Might have been why they were actually sold to brokers, is that ABV had dropped really low. Don't know if they did a lower filling strength for this or what they were messing around with, but Bruichladdich is a very experimental distillery. And this is quite a delicate, sophisticated Octomore, in my opinion. So I'm going to pour some on my glass to get into it. It's still going to be powerfully peated compared to the whiskies that were tried previously this evening. Very different on the nose from what we've tried. Still obviously has that sort of coastal maritime seaweed note coming through. But one of the things I sometimes find with heavily peated whiskies is that I start to get almost a slightly menthol note, almost like a dark chili chocolate, or no, maybe with a bit of minted chocolate as well. Start to get that note coming through. There are some green notes in this whiskey as well, I feel. Like almost like a fresh sort of green apple-like character.
Mm.
Obviously plenty of smoke on the palate, but it's actually quite balanced. And which is something obviously that Octomore is not known for, as being being delicate and having poise. It's not what they're generally aiming for, but quite an unusual bottling if you are familiar with Octomore.
These last two aren't available, are they, anymore?
They are completely gone, sold out worldwide, unfortunately. Yeah. Like, unfortunately, trying to get single casts of these again is just something we can't repeat at the moment. We hope we'll be able to bring out more single cask character viola bottlings in the future, but it's just when we can get hold of those single casks at a price that we can afford to put in a bottle. I mean, I think the retail of both of these would have been around the $350, $400 mark.
Yeah.
When we had them.
Yeah. I'm actually quite enjoying this one. Like, it's still got that dry smoke, but I'm quite enjoying just the nose on it. Palate's really, really nice and finish. Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, green apple, Patrick, I think so. George has said opening a packet of sunflower seeds. Great, it's good to know.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, green.
Yeah,
green apple. It's
there's just this real sort of fresh fruity note, and then you start to get hit with that smoke, which you might not be immediately expecting.
Mm.
Never thought I'd enjoy an Octomore. Wow, really great dram. Yeah, I mean, exactly. This might be why. In the case of Bruichladdich, is they were doing a lot of experimental stuff. So we bought all sorts of Hermitage, Chateau Yquem, Reef Salt wine casks from Bruichladdich in the past, and Octomore casks that maybe don't fit in with what they're trying to achieve with their official bottlings. But that's the great thing about independent bottlers. You're going to try amazing spirit that's quite different from official releases.
Yeah, brilliant. Some good five great whiskies, really. Yeah, I mean, incredible.
Look, I think it's a really interesting lineup, an interesting tasting pack, because we've got 4 different distilleries in the lineup, but just quite a breadth of ages and styles. I think it really shows you how diverse Islay whiskies can be, and just all those characters you're not expecting. Like, obviously we always talk about maritime influence, seaweed, peat, bandages, band-aids, TCP, all those characters that people talk about with Islay whiskey. And when you start to see, these really old Islers and smaller single cask bottlings, there's a lot more nuance and sophistication to Islay than you might expect.
Yeah, definitely there is. Yeah. I mean, ultimately, just for the last two, I mean, how many of these have you got left? You just keep buy a few boxes. If you can't get a bottle.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, so I think the only ones that are still available, the Aerolite Grey Seal and Fiona, unfortunately the single casks. We don't have any in Australia at the moment. I think there might be a couple in the UK, but yeah, I mean, we're bottled under the single cask. We did have a 35-year-old Port Ellen, a 19-year-old Bowmore. We had a couple of Lafroigs. Got a Lafroig behind me, a nameable Lafroig, and I actually got invited along to a tasting. Just because there was a Lafroig tasting, and then include a couple of indie Lafroigs, and they were both both our character Islay Wind and Wave bottlings, and we were trying some 27-year-old and 25-year-old official Lafroigs, and did a little vote at the end of what stood out and what people really liked, and it was my 15-year-olds that managed to beat the 25-year-old and 27-year-old official bottlings, which I felt a bit bad for the guys from Beam Suntory. Did a great job, but I wasn't expecting for our ones to come out on top. Yeah.
That's it. Well, usually at this time we offer a discount for these, but we've not got many of them, so we haven't got a discount code tonight, I'm afraid, because they're just so rare. There's only a few bottles left. If you're looking for a bottle, this is the last of them. Obviously, they are pretty much collector's items, as well as they are there for you to enjoy. But yeah, definitely they are the last of a breed of bottlings that, particularly if you are Macleod, certainly the last time I think we'll see something like that that's at an affordable price is at there. I was very lucky quite recently to try a 1979 bicentennial Bowmore. And again, these are things that
we tried that recently too. That was an incredible
yeah, they are experiences, and sometimes those experiences you never want to finish.
Yeah.
Never-ending bottle, but yeah, it's definitely and saying that, the 1979 Bowmore is now going for I think around $25,000 to $28,000 now. I think that's what it is for a bottle. Yeah. So if you can find a bottle, a lot of them are going for that. So they certainly those types of bottles go up in price. But yeah, that's it. Yeah. Jason said, note the earlier question on smoke being later with the Octomore. We agree. Any insights as to why that is in the Octomore?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that, to be perfectly honest. Maybe it's something to do with the still shape at Brookladder. You got very tall stills, so they're not taking over a lot of those heavier phenols. So it is actually, although it's very heavily peated malt, a lot of those heavier alcohols aren't actually making it over. So I think that is why you're actually starting to get that smoke come through a bit late. And you get a little bit more, get some of those lighter, more volatile characters first. That fresh fruit, that freshness comes before that peat. But I mean, I don't know if that's, I couldn't answer that conclusively.
When I was in Scotland last time, bear in mind it was 5 years ago, I spoke to a distiller at Tomintoul, and he said he thinks with Octomore, I find that's always been the same, and we had the same conversation a while back, was he believes that what it could be is that your palate, see that high ppm, phenols parts per million, your palate actually cannot taste further than a certain amount. So like it only tastes up to 90. So then what happens is when Octomore's in your palate and it starts to break down in your palate with saliva and the rest of the whiskey, that's when the smoke appears, because it's actually there and it's this big smoke, but your palate's not recognizing that until it breaks down a little bit with saliva and just in the back of your palate, sort of thing. And so he thought that's what it was. So because he always said, oh, it's ridiculous, the ppm. You don't taste it because your palate doesn't taste it. It's not, and some people might, taste it quicker than others, and that's why you get a different smoke with Octomore. Some people love it, some people don't like it, etc. My wife always says, somebody will say, oh, taste taste Octomore, it's the smokiest, it's the peatiest whiskey, and she'll say it's not. It's the Ardbeg Corrie Reckon. It's smokier.
Yeah.
You know, it's the biggest, smokiest one ever. But it's just the way I think Octomore hits your palate and what your palate's like, and maybe how it opens. So it might be that. I don't know.
I like that theory. I like that one.
That's what you said. So I've stuck with that one for a while now.
I mean, that's the thing. I mean, it's a really good question about ppm. Like, as we're seeing with these older whiskies, the peat, although that grey seal is heavily peated, so the grey seal is actually more heavily peated than the Aerolite Lyndsay, but is much less peaty. That obviously that's to do with age. But Lagavulin, for example, is exactly the same ppm as Kalila, but Lagavulin is far smokier, far peatier, far richer than Kalila, and that's just to do with distillation, fermentation. Both distilleries is relatively similar, but the shape of the stills, the angle of the line arm, and how they make their cut, so when they collect the heart of the spirit, is quite different. And that's what differentiates those two whiskies, so much.
Yeah, I think Patrick's also asked, where do you keep them? What, the bottles or the casks?
So look, we're currently in the process of moving all our casks to our own warehouse in Edinburgh, and we've had a warehouse and bottling line there for some time. But we actually store casks all around Scotland, and that's quite common. So if you're Diageo, for example, you don't store all your Talisker at Talisker. In fact, you mostly use central warehousing at Canvas or Blackgrange, but you also spread all your distilleries as far around as possible. So most distilleries will have whiskies from all around from all different distilleries from around Scotland, and it's great for insurance purposes, because distilleries, obviously, they produce a lot of alcohol. Alcohol is very flammable. If one of them was to go up in flames, you'll lose all that whiskey. You've got old stocks stored somewhere else in Scotland. So casks are stored all around Scotland. We're the same. We have various brokers that will store casks for us. We store casks at distilleries. We try to move the cask as little as possible. There's a lot of risk if you move a cask. If you move that cask and it springs a leak, it could spell disaster. So we try not to move the cask until we're ready for it. We'll request samples. Usually, once every couple of years, we'll get a sample from that cask. If we are looking at bottling it, we might ask the samples a bit closer to bottling. Then we ship that to our warehouse at Edinburgh, disgorge that whiskey, measure the ABV again, then proceed to bottling. But all around Scotland, basically. Yep. But we are moving most of them to Edinburgh now.
Good. Why Edinburgh?
That's because it's where our bottling line is. We're just trying to be efficient.
Yeah.
So, I mean, as an independent bottler, one of the challenges we have is trying to do this is a little sort of behind the curtain secret of the trade. Trying to do natural cask strength whiskies is very difficult. So if I have a cask stored at Ben Nevis Distillery, for example, and I order my sample and it's at 56.8%, go, excellent, this is ready, let's bottle it. And then we print our labels, 56.8%. I then ship that cask to our bottling line, disgorge it, and now it's 55.9%. Okay, those labels are just printed, are worthless. We need to start again. So it is quite a challenge. So what we'll actually normally do is we'll take a sample, we'll decide on what ABV that whiskey drinks well at, and then bring the whiskey in, measure the ABV again, and then drop it to the ABV we decided on. So if we have the whiskey all in our own warehouse, we can do a lot more. It's easier for us to do natural cask strength. Otherwise, we create a bit of a backlog of stuff coming in. So we have to disgorge that whiskey, measure the ABV, then send off our labels to print. It's just not as efficient. So just little insight there.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah. Is there any way to seal the cask when you transport it to prevent any?
The best way to do it is to put it into a IBC or a intermediary bulk container. So disgorge it is the safest way. So we bottle whiskies from all around the world, particularly under boutique. And if anything's going overseas, we do not ship in casks. Way too dangerous. Way too dangerous. Yes, you. No, we do ship. We will ship full casks around Scotland when we need to, but we try to do it as little as possible. that's the best way to protect them.
It's good. Yeah. If you're lowering the ABV at a bottling plant, then what is your source of water? Is it the same as the original distillery source?
No, reverse osmosis filtered water where we can. So we don't want to have the water to have any impact on the whiskey whatsoever. Yeah, that's the key. As long as we're not using something that has heavy minerals, we use as pure water as physically possible. We don't want our water having an impact on the whiskey. Yeah. And that's the same. That pretty much the same goes for most distilleries. Is that where possible? If you look at somewhere like Archie Rose Distillery, for example, up in Sydney, reverse osmosis filtered water. A lot of Australian distilleries will do the same thing. I think the having soft water is important. So having water that's not high in minerals is important, especially when it comes to fermentation as well. But yeah, when it comes to keep in mind, you add after distillation, you're going to add water. But then often, especially we look at larger distilleries like Diageo, any Diageo distillery, so they'll fill up a tanker and then ship that and cask it on the mainland as well. So Laphroaig, for all their single malt, is aged on Islay now, but otherwise, a lot of their whiskey they'll still ship to the mainland. So not all Laphroaig is aged at Laphroaig, just what they bottle as their single malts.
Yeah.
But yeah, most big concerns will actually fill up a tanker and bottle in the mainland and use a different water source anyway. So the best way to make sure there's no difference is to have very pure water.
Yeah. That was always the stage with Arran, was that when Arran started out, there was no warehouses in Arran. They weren't allowed any warehouses. So they had to store them at Springbank. So they stored at Springbank, and then suddenly from there, Springbank got full, and then they had to start storing at Bladnoch. And then Bladnoch was bought over by a Australian chap, and they were then moved on again, and then by that time, obviously, Arran had warehousing, but it was a lot of they were always pushing their stuff off the island. It was just no room for it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few arguments around it, right? Like Islay's a beautiful little island, and they produce a lot of whiskey there. Do you really want that island covered in warehouses? And it would be if you didn't age any of it on the mainland. So there's a lot of romance as to where whiskey's aged, and there is a good argument for terroir and whiskey in some cases. So whiskey having a sense of place, but at some point it's going to come at a cost. And I think a lot of that character or that signature of where the whiskey comes from happens before aging. Aging will have an impact. Where it's aged will have an impact. But keep in mind, most of Scotland is coastal, most of Scotland is humid, and most of Scotland is cool. So there are certainly different microclimates, but how much of an impact that has on the final whiskey is still, the people are investigating it, but still a bit of a mystery.
Yeah. We always talk about now as well, we've got a 33-year-old whiskey there tonight, and we always talk about the fact that in Australia, it's going to be very hard to get a 40-year-old whiskey in Australia, with obviously fluctuation in temperature, etc. And just wonder with climate change, whether Scotland will eventually get to the point where a 40 or 50-year-old whiskey won't exist anymore, because the fluctuation of temperature is so big. So
I think that's an interesting debate. I think there is such a demand for it, though. It seems like every major brand is suddenly finding this forgotten 50-year-old cask, and it's a great marketing opportunity to have whiskey of that age. I don't think they'll stop making whiskey of that age, but yeah, it's certainly a concern. But there's people that have quite a smart sort of way around it, like Ardnamurchan Merkin, for example. Part of their warehousing is actually covered by the hill, that their warehousing sort of goes up in the hill that actually helps sort of insulate their warehousing. So I guess there will be ways around it, and people will need to be smart about how they approach the maturation of their spirit.
Definitely. Well, thank you for stepping in tonight, Simon.
Pleasure.
Done wonderful. I hope everybody's enjoyed it. Before I say goodbye to everybody, I just want to share a story with you where I was drinking a smoky whiskey the other night. I had this appeal for the smoky whiskey, and before I went to bed, I poured myself a nice little. We've got lag coming in now from Arran, so I poured myself a lag, and I sat next to the bed. And anyway, I got up the next morning, and I I woke up and there's a smell in there, and I couldn't quite understand what it was. And I went and I got ready to go to work, and I shouted down the stairs to my, "Can you smell something burning?" She's like, "What?" I said, "I can smell a burning in there. Is there a fire in the area?" She's like, "Nah, can't smell it." And I said, "No, there's definitely, it's like a smouldering wood." And I'm looking around, and we recently had the house renovated, and I'm thinking, I hope there's not something wrong here. It's like I'm looking around, and you need to come up. I can smell it. Must we just be up here because we're up high, the windows, you know, something like that. She comes up and she's like, "Yeah, I can smell it." And she's like, "Yeah, she claps me over the back of the head and she says, "You didn't drink any of your whiskey last night. It's still sitting next to the bed." That's what I can smell. I was like, "Oh, geez, so it is." Didn't even realize. I was like, "Oh my God, how did I do that?" I've just fallen asleep and the whole room's smelling of smoke. But yeah, you can get some smoky whiskies out there. Thank you very much again, and thank you everybody for tuning in. If you've not already bought, or if you have bought, they just sold out in the past hour. It was our Wobbs distillery tasting, Tasmanian tasting, and Craig, stop putting whiskey in your humidifier. I can do. I think. What was it? Put them in those little burners, you know, those little
incense burners.
Burner, yeah. And then so we've got Wobbs tasting Tuesday night. It's now fully booked. So we've got that one coming up, and then that'll be the last one for the year. And then hopefully we'll get involved in a few more next year, probably leading into March. But again, thanks to everybody for joining us. Thanks to Simon and for George for setting all this up for us tonight. And there's the whiskies on the website there. It's the last of it. We've not got many bottles. Probably when we finish up, we'll try and secure whatever I can from these guys here, so we can keep a few on the site and have a wonderful night. But thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Cheers.
Good night.